But the no, but like the late 60s and early 70s, you guys have seen that chart, right? Like productivity and wages. Like around that time when the two lines diverged. Alright, so diagonal across the side of that hill there, and then all this is just straight through. Straight through all of this, straight through all this chungo, straight through. Okay, where should I set the benchmark for the straight line? Not the benchmark, like where do I line this up? Probably at the river crossing here. That should probably go like into there. Let's see, that block is like there, like here? Here. There. There. Man, I have to demolish a whole lot of stuff in here. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Probably. Absurdity, but with Hong Kong and Sudan, you can see a lot of unrest today again. Hopefully people have had enough. Westerners are too apathetic though. Hong Kong is curious. I'm from Hong Kong and I have opinions about Hong Kong, and I'm not sure if we want to hear my opinions or not. Less controversially, I think the people of Hong Kong are what's the word? It's growing pains. They're trying to figure out democracy, and they haven't quite figured it out, and so there's a bit of confusion in the meantime as they're trying to figure out democracy. And like, you know, if you keep in mind the big picture and remember what happened in the French Revolution, for example, democracy is complicated. You don't always get it right the first time. The French tried, and then they got Napoleon, and then eventually they kind of figured it out afterwards. I just realized I want this to be one block higher. How is this? Isn't democracy in Hong Kong about to disappear when mainland China takes over in a few years? No, there's never been democracy in Hong Kong, however. Or democracy in Hong Kong has always been very limited. So some people think that the Chinese are just willing to take over, but they're not. They're actually not. It's a meme that isn't really factual. How is this right? So why are they trying to work it out? If it's not there. No, because they want it. I think there will be democracy. I think there'll be democracy in China eventually. They just have to figure it out. Absurdity says the current system is everyone has to be approved by China already, and the majority of votes are to businesses. Yes, democracy in France never worked that well, otherwise Napoleon couldn't have happened. No, I mean exactly, democracy took a while to figure it out. Unless they overthrow the current rulers, they'll never have democracy. I'm not sure if that's entirely true absurdity. And also remember that Hong Kong was a British colony, and so it inherits a lot of the British traditions. Democracy with Chinese characteristics is what they keep calling it. So, I mean, look, keep in mind that technically the Queen is the sovereign in the UK. It's just that the Queen always does what Parliament says, or what the government suggests, right? When Hong Kong was handed back to China, when the sovereignty of Hong Kong was handed back to China, it basically retained that, except that the Chinese government took over from the Queen. So instead of the Queen appointing the governor of Hong Kong, now China appoints the chief executive of Hong Kong. And so yeah, like, but technically by law, China has to approve the chief executive. But the question is, will they ever disapprove? Just like, will the Queen in the UK ever contradict the Parliament? As long as she doesn't contradict the Parliament, there's democracy. It's kind of like that. And that's never been tested, like, right? Because there's never been elections for the chief executive yet. And so there's been no chance for China to approve or reject the people's will. And so it's never been tested. So there's this kind of strange fear as this uncertainty is there. And a lot of, well, not a lot of, some people in Hong Kong believe that China will, of course, reject the will of the Hong Kong people. But that's never been actually tested. They just believe that. And my perspective is, we should test that. And if the Chinese reject the people that Hong Kong elect, then the people of Hong Kong should revolt. They shouldn't preemptively revolt before testing just how far their autonomy goes. Anyway, that's just, I mean, it's kind of pedantic. But yeah, I guess, like, how did the UK transition into a democracy? I mean, technically it still has a queen. It's that the queen kind of voluntarily, chose not to exercise those sovereign powers without the approval of a democratically elected government. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Harvard says we should all be protesting based on everything else they've done. Tibet Muslim families being separated, undergoing re-education. Yeah, it's, I mean, China does rely on fear to rule people, and I'm not entirely sure why they do. How says, why give them benefit of the doubt when they've been proven as acting in bad faith? But is there proof though? Is there proof that they're acting in bad faith? To the Muslims, for example, to the Uyghur. the Chinese, the way the Chinese government operates is by acting a lot scarier than they actually are. For example, we know people who have, because people who, like the corrupt officials, they would kind of take money and they'd migrate elsewhere. And you know, every so often we would hear about friends of friends, acquaintances, who have taken, like, embezzled money out of China and like moved to New Zealand, for example. And the Chinese would like send people here to talk to them and convince them to go back and face justice. And you hear these stories and they sound terrifying, but when you get down to the bottom of it, they never beat anyone up. They never force anyone to confess. They don't torture anyone. They don't hold anyone against their will. But they would invite people to talk to them. And somehow they are so, like, it's so scary that people would go voluntarily to talk to them. Maybe there's some like psychological thing going on. Maybe they're just really good at interrogation. I don't know what it is. But in all these stories, I hear people being terrified, but I don't hear anything actually wrong. And this is, I can't name names because, you know, these people. So this is like a hearsay from acquaintances. And that's how the Chinese government operates. Somehow they are able to convince people to be scared of them without having to do anything actually bad to people. Somehow. Yeah, however, like, I mean, it sounds kind of, I mean, it sounds wrong, but then when you ask them, what did they beat you up? Did they lock you? Like, what did they do? They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. They just invited me to their office and we had a talk and then they let me go, is what they tell me. It's a story that they tell. So it's like, okay, I mean, but they didn't, you know, ostensibly they're not wrong in what they're doing. So, I don't know, man. But people are terrified of them, and you wonder, should they be terrified? But nobody tests. I guess the point I'm trying to make is nobody tests it. Nobody tests just how far the Chinese will go. But they assume that the Chinese will go to any lengths to stay in power. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not telling people to test them because that could get them in a whole lot of trouble. I'm just saying that. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, Harbour, either. I'm not sure what to make of it. Absurdity says, don't Marxists in China disappear regularly? People disappear, Absurdity. Harvard says the Scotch students in the square a few years ago, if I recall correctly, was the test of how far they went. Which one are you talking about, Harbour? In Absurdity, people disappear, but the other side of the disappearing story is Absurdity. Again, from these acquaintances that you hear stories from, is when the government invites them to have a chat, they don't contact their family members to tell them where they are because they're scared that the government would then go after the family members too. So the people themselves, according to these stories that I hear, the people themselves voluntarily disappear themselves to go talk to the government, and then they come back after talking to the government, and then they don't say anything because they're scared of saying things. And that's how people disappear in China. It's not like in these stories, you don't hear about forced kidnappings. Is that when they come to talk to you, the people will go talk to them. However, about Tiananmen, I have in my home like books with collections of photographs of what happened at Tiananmen from the time that it happened. And like they're photos, and they tell a story that is not exactly what the Western media tells, and also not exactly what the Chinese government tells. I suppose I can't show them on Twitch because there's like dead people in them and like mangled people in them. But the photos, yeah, no, Tiananmen wasn't just students. Tiananmen was not entirely peaceful. There are photos of dead protesters, yes, but there are also photos of dead soldiers. It was in some parts, it was a armed or a violent uprising. In some parts, not in all parts. And the books, like the photos, the books with photos in them, there's both sides of it too, and I don't want to both sides things. But like there's like books that are clearly protester, and they're published in English, and then there are other books like that are kind of pro-government and they're in Chinese, and they show different things. However, the tanks, again, going back to the way the Chinese government operates, they operate by scaring people. The Tiananmen, they sent the troops in to clear the square. They didn't send the troops in to kill people. They sent the troops in to push them out of the square, which they did. But people were so scared that the troops were there to kill people that people fought the troops to try to stop them, and that's where the deaths happened. Again, like they operate on this kind of menace. And like the survivors, they didn't go in to crush the students. Is that when they sent the tanks in to clear the square, the people who lived in Beijing believed that they were there to crush the students, and so they went and they attacked the soldiers, and the soldiers fought back. And there are like pictures and videos of the time when like the soldiers were given orders to push the students out, not kill them, but just push them out. And if anyone tries to get in your way, you should deal with them. And there are like pictures of people trying to stop them, getting shot, and then the soldiers just moving on. So they weren't there to kill people, but they were there to clear the students out. No questions. And but there's also photos before that of protesters or maybe just troublemakers killing the soldiers. So it was going on for weeks and weeks, and the soldiers were getting attacked without retaliating for weeks and weeks, and then they retaliated. Absurdity says it shouldn't be expected to be peaceful when they're protesting a police state. Being violent doesn't make it legitimate. No. Right, absurdity. Like, if you accept that violence is legitimate in this case, the state was equally violent back against them. And the uprising failed. I mean, however, there are photos of like lines of military vehicles that have been burned out, and the caption says that some of the soldiers were burned inside the vehicles, although there were not photos of that, so I don't know if that's true or not. But like the protesters were attacking the troops with deadly force, with like firebombs and things. Yeah, it's time, however. I mean, again, I don't want to justify rolling tanks into a city. Like, I don't think that's a good idea. But it's also like it's also not simple. It's complicated. Absurdity says, I don't support using riot police or military on any protests. It's the same in the West. But what if the protest... Look, absurdity. What if the protests are like killing people? What if, let's say, now in America, the Proud Boys and the Antifa are literally fighting in the streets and killing each other? What do you do about that absurdity? Alright, I'm gonna end the video here and end the how is this then you arrest them? It's not a war. How do you arrest them if they're coming at you with deadly force? I mean, you at the very best you have to subdue them with non-lethal force if you can. Anyway, I'm gonna end the video here. See you next week.